Hi, I'm Randy Reid, editor of the Edison Report and an NLB board member. We're broadcasting from the studio of one of the NLB sponsors, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Washington, D.C. We are here for the 12th Annual Lighting Forum. I am joined by Melissa Mattis and Webster Marsh of Slayton Feinstein Integrated Lighting, and of course Webster is part of the LCA. The name of this session is Something About Controls and Sustainability. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Webster, tell our audience about the title.
Well, yeah, basically, Tom and I were chatting, and he was like, well, you know, what's the title going to be? And I was like, well, it's probably going to be something about sustainability and controls. And he was like, that's it. That's the title.
Well, I think it's very descriptive.
Right.
So I like it. Mel, first question for you is, how should the lighting industry define sustainability today beyond energy efficiency?
That's a very popular question these days, especially post LED world. You know, where we have been so focused on efficacy, you know, since the popularity of LEDs, but because we've pushed it about as far as we can go in that direction. As far as like operational carbon, we start looking at a broader range beyond just operational carbon, and start looking at, well, how can we reduce our embodied carbon? So embodied carbon is anything like that's outside of the operational stage of the light fixture. So if you think of raw material extraction through the manufacturing process, how does that product get to the site, and then what happens to the product after its end of life? Where does it go? So all of those other life stages besides just the operational life part of the fixture is embodied carbon. And so there's a lot of talk now about how can we reduce that part of the footprint.
Okay. And let's jump into that just a little bit. What is the industry doing, specifically the lighting industry, with regard to measuring, publishing, documenting, and specifying embodied carbon? Where are we?
That's another popular question. It's a little tricky. So not just in the lighting industry, but like in the built environment, you know, this is a larger question for other product categories as well. And so we're seeing the popularity of life cycle assessments. We see EPDs, which are environmental product declarations. So we're basically doing studies of the impact of the fixture in these different categories, really focusing a lot on global warming potential. There's a lot of pros and cons to these different studies. They require immense amounts of research, and you know, it requires like a certain amount of funding. But it gives us insight into these different products that we wouldn't have otherwise. And so when you start thinking about whole building life cycle assessments, like really being able to understand the operational footprint of an entire building, it really requires this data from all of these different product categories. And so a lot of others like are much further along than we are in lighting, but this is the trend in the larger industry. And so like lighting is seeing the impacts of that as well.
Okay. So Webster, to her point about the LCAs, the EPDs, the footprint of the building, how much are lighting designers actually using that today?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies. That is something that Slayton Feinstein is focused on trying to get at for information from their manufacturers. These are common questions that we'll ask when we go to like a factory tour. But the challenge is really getting that information in a consistent manner. And right now, documentation is already having a challenge with consistency and standardization. So where do you find this information? How do you vet this information is a real challenge for specifiers.
So ballpark of the jobs that you design, what percent of those are you looking for EPDs?
Well, as a lighting controls designer, I'm even further down the curve than the lighting designers are. So I don't really get as much of a choice to be able to vet that. Lighting controls manufacturers don't really produce that kind of data the same way that lighting manufacturers produce right now. So I would say that we still have a long way to go with lighting controls.
Mel, for you on your designs, what percent do you use EPDs?
We're not there yet. The industry is not there yet. That isn't something that you can ask for across the board. I mean, you'd be lucky to find it, and there's very, very, very few out there. What is a little bit more realistic to ask for is a more generalized EPD. So instead of a product specific EPD, it's more of a product category.
Right.
And so those are, there's been 2 incubator programs that have taken place over the past year and a half, 2 years. And these reports are just getting published probably early next year.
Okay.
So we're kind of like at the cusp of a new, big, new information is coming that we haven't had access to before. So I'm really curious to see how that affects, the asks over the course of the next year or so.
Sure. Okay, Webster, to you, what are the biggest missed opportunities in integrated lighting with other building systems for sustainability gains?
I mean, the biggest missed opportunity in general is integration. We, in the lighting industry, love to silo ourselves, love to exist in our own little bubble and not really expand out and coordinate with other systems. So creating that integration, creating that dialogue really would help in a lot of different ways. And there's so much data that a lighting control system can collect and utilize and automate based on. And we're not even close to reaching even half of the potential of what a lighting control system can do if it's fully integrated with a building system.
Mel, what sustainability claims in the lighting market do you think are misleading and overdue, I guess, for tougher standards?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, I guess, kind of how the word is thrown around, or how even like the term green lighting is kind of thrown around. There's a misconception as to, what that means, and you can make a lot of assumptions on, well, because this product uses this material versus this material, it's more or less green, which in reality, unless we have an EPD to compare those two, or we actually know like the carbon footprint of the entire life cycle of those products, you really can't make those claims very well. So without having the depth of data that we would really need to look at products in that way, it gets a little wishy-washy.
So let's speak to that, though. So how do you do a design that you want it to be sustainability, and you don't have the EPDs? You've got the marketing sales sheets that talk about this as a green product. How do you ascertain what is really sustainable?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The approach that we've been taking in our office is we identify the top 3 quantity fixtures. So we know those are going to have the largest impact on our jobs. And we target those top 3 products to higher standards, basically. And because we do want to have measurable ways to make those claims, we've been turning to things like Declare Label, where they're basically showing material transparency about their product. And, of course, there's a lot of back and forth about Declare itself, but to the fact that these manufacturers have made the investment of these disclosures does say something. Right. So we will use that as a standard. And then we'll look at recycled aluminum and of course efficacy like that. It goes without saying.
Okay. But again, a handful of architectural products in a conference room is probably not going to hit the radar when it comes to specifying for sustainability. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're really looking at commodity fixtures, the downlights, the linears, the big quantity.
Okay, understood. Okay, Webster, how can lighting controls meaningfully support decarbonization beyond simple kilowatt hour reduction?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways that lighting controls can really be part of these conversations. A couple years ago, I did a presentation at Light Fair that kind of gained a lot of ire from our industries, making a claim that if you start being more creative with lighting controls design, you can really see more realized gains. But that is, again, just kilowatt hours. But if we focus on how we utilize space, how we take advantage of what we're doing within those spaces. For instance, measuring occupancy data. We can really kind of identify, do we need as much space in a building that as we are currently purporting to have? Do we need 20 conference rooms in a building, or can we distill it down to 3? And so that right there, if we reduce the footprint size of the building because we've identified, okay, well, you don't have as much traffic as you thought, that right there reduces waste in its own way. So the data itself is really the best resource that lighting controls can provide that we're just not taking advantage of right now.
Well, I think the work that you're doing with LCA's Lighting Controls Academy, with your podcast, with everything else that you're doing, I think is really helping to educate the market, but still controls aren't where they should be. What do you see as the biggest problem with getting controls implemented?
Well, the consistent theme that's come up on the podcast has been education. We're really good at educating ourselves, but we're really terrible about educating anybody else. And so end users really don't understand what lighting controls are doing, how they can benefit their projects. They just see it as an additional cost to their project because of energy code requirements or something to that effect. We just don't do a good job of telling them, okay, this is what a lighting control system really is, and this is how you can benefit from its presence.
Do the market channels that we have in the industry that's somewhat unique, with reps having certain lines, do the reps help or hinder the ability to get more controls on the job?
It's a much more complex situation than just an either or, but I think that in our current model in North America, they are the central point upon which everything kind of demands. They are navigating between designers, owners, end users, contractors. They're the people who help create that opportunity for lighting controls to really be done efficiently. Now, granted, there are bad actors out there. There are manufacturers' reps that will try to take advantage of their place. And
give me a specific. How does that work? How do they take advantage?
Sure. So they are the keepers of information. They're the people who provide the data to the specifiers, for instance. So if I'm an electrical engineer, the majority of the time I'm going to lean on my sales rep and say, hey, can you help me design a lighting control system? Groups like Slayton Feinstein kind of break the model by having a lighting controls designer in-house. But most of the sales reps are the ones doing that design work. And so as a result, they have all of the information they need to be able to provide a complete and thorough lighting control system, but they can also add to that unnecessarily. So we see a lot of projects that are bloated and unnecessarily complex because of the fact that it increases sales revenue. And so that's where a bad actor can really come into play if they identify an owner that doesn't know much about lighting controls and comes to them and says, I need a lighting control system. It just needs to be minimal. They might go, oh, well, you need this, 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 and this because energy code and they could certainly bloat that price tag and make it so much more expensive than it needs to be.
Well, last night during dinner, you shared an example about a driver. Without naming names, tell our audience a little bit about what happened with that driver.
Yeah, sure. So we have a project that we're trying to substitute drivers out for different drivers, basically drivers that have internal communications capabilities rather than relying on like a 0 to 10 volt signal going out to a power pack. It would just communicate directly to the system. And in trying to do that, we met a lot of resistance to that capability. Now, sometimes the argument was, well, we can't fit that driver inside our fixture. But other times it was sort of a little questionable why exactly they were pushing back on this. And I part of me suspects that there's a desire to just continue with the status quo rather than to innovate and add to what could be. Because adding the communications capabilities directly to the fixture rather than having this intermediary reduces the quantity of devices you have on a project, reduces the installation costs. And so as a result, it's a much better and more efficient solution, but it breaks the model, and as a result, the lighting controls provider doesn't get to sell as much as they would otherwise. So there's sort of this balancing act that is going on through the sales channels. And I get it, there's also risk. If you're subbing a part out, you're increasing your risk on a project. But at the same time, a driver is in a lot of cases an uncertainty already. If you spec a 0 to 10 volt driver on a fixture, you don't know whether it's going to be an Eldo LED or another manufacturer, because they don't disclose that information. And they probably will never disclose that information throughout the entire lifespan of the project. So you just know that it's a 0 to 10 volt driver that you have.
Right. And they do that because they want to have the flexibility.
Yes.
The manufacturer wants to have the flexibility to use maybe whatever they have in stock, whatever is less expensive.
Exactly. But as a result, the lighting designers are at a disadvantage because they don't have that full transparency, and they're taking it on faith that that driver is the right driver.
Mel, looking ahead, what role do you see the lighting community playing in shaping national guidance or best practices for sustainable lighting in the next decade?
I don't know how much influence the lighting industry in particular has. What I'm really curious about is who is setting the standards for how we're creating our lighting. Because what I'm wondering is obviously we know LED when some fixtures are made as throwaway fixtures and some are made with replaceable parts like modules and whatnot.
Right.
What I really struggle with is the lack of standardization of the module, as opposed to more historical sources where all of the lamps were standardized, and
right.
Those were interchangeable, and did not depend on the manufacturer of the fixture itself. And there was a lot of that in many ways that's very sustainable, even though it was using more energy to run those fixtures. But the fact that we didn't have that that blockage to extending the longevity of the fixture, I feel like things have become so complex these days that a lot of times it's easier just to throw the fixture away or just to start over, even if it does have replaceable parts. And so what I would love to see is there a way that we can standardize, these components so that there's more interchangeability between manufacturers, so that we're giving power back to the user, and that they can have more control over that and the life of the fixture.
I'll just add, before I go to you, Lance Bennett at the IES 25, the annual conference, was doing a survey and asking certain questions. Exactly, what do you consider a repairable fixture? And just trying to get definitions for the industry, and I thought that was fascinating. Webster?
Well, and going off of that point, it's a similar situation with lighting controls. Right now in North America, if you want to change the functionality or the system that you have existing in a building, you most of the time have to rip out the whole lighting control system and start over. And so that's the unfortunate reality of being in a proprietary world, is that you can't mix and match devices. So it's very similar in that sense, and really against sustainability.
Exactly.
To
And
have to
even
do
if
that.
it has all of these the most advanced possibilities for information and whatnot, it's if it only lives in the building for 5 years,
Right.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And so you're really undoing all of that decarbonization that you're doing through the kilowatt hours by just having to reproduce all of the equipment that goes into the building again.
Okay, for either one of you, what role do lighting professionals play in developing guidance that ensures controls aren't just installed, but are actually commissioned and used?
I would say that part of it is engaging in the conversation. I mean, Slayton Feinstein is one of the very few lighting design groups in North America anyways that has a lighting controls dedicated role. There's actually 2 of us at Slayton Feinstein who are controls specialists.
But that is unique.
It's very unique, but they've realized that we need to be at the table to talk about controls. We need to know what we're doing. We need to engage and potentially even lead that conversation, because there are very few people otherwise who are leading that conversation. And as we talked about, it tends to be a very proprietary conversation, especially when you have the sales reps involved. Now, all credit to the sales reps. They do a monolithic task of trying to provide for an industry that is currently shrugging off that responsibility. But by doing that, you are stuck to their brand. Whereas if you use an independent group, you are not stuck to any one brand. You have a much more open opportunity, and even to maybe even mix and match, if possible, the different systems that are out there. So you're not just one system. You might have multiple systems communicating with each other.
Well, you mentioned a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Another person who needs a seat at the table is the integrator. What is the role of the integrator, and how important are integrators these days?
They're essential. If we're doing just the stock, out of the box kind of setup, sure, they're not really part of that equation, but most lighting control systems are not that. There needs to be programming, there needs to be integration, there needs to be thought. And additionally, as I said, we are underutilizing our lighting control systems if we're not tying them to other systems. And that integration requires an integrator. Whether that's provided by the manufacturer or that's a third party is a whole other conversation. But we cannot achieve lighting controls without integrators.
And not just residential,
Correct.
Architectural lighting as well.
Absolutely. And we're seeing a lot heavier demand on what lighting controls can do just in their own silo, let alone integrating with other systems. That becomes integration capabilities that we need to provide. And so additionally, as lighting designers step into this role of being lighting controls designers as well, they're going to have to coordinate that integration. They're going to need to lead that conversation.
Yeah. That makes me think too about like post-occupancy data.
Yes.
I often wish that we had more post-occupancy data about our designs and being part of the integration, part of that equation as well. And I feel like probably architects have more insight into that, and it makes me wonder if maybe there's something that we could do on the lighting design side to kind of circle back to our architects more, and even though we don't have it in our budget to go and gather the data, what information they're gathering to kind of share back with us that's lighting related.
No, and that's a really good point, because a lot of systems do have that data capability, but that data is not doing anything. It's just sitting somewhere, or it's not even getting collected. And so if we could collect that and store it and utilize it, we could actually do a lot more and understand how systems are being utilized than just a lot of the time lighting designers just kind of take a guess at what the system should do.
And a lot of times we don't know post-occupancy
Absolutely.
too, as well, unless something goes wrong.
Right.
We'll hear about it.
Yeah, for sure. We'll get that nuisance call. But, having that visibility post-occupancy really would give us a lot more knowledge and awareness of how buildings are being utilized.
Mel, earlier you mentioned about some of the legacy products, the lamp and ballast, and replacing those to extend the life of the fixture. When do you think we will be there with LED? And who will drive it?
That's $1 million question.
All right, 5 years? Do you think in 5 years we'll...
I don't even know if who's talking about that. And I often wonder myself, who's driving that? Is that the Department of Energy? Is this where is this?
Well, we know some manufacturers are talking about it. IES is talking about it. IALD is talking about it. A lot of people are talking about it.
I don't have an answer for that one.
All right.
I mean, I think part of it is there a financial incentive to move forward with it?
Yeah,
For instance,
the stick or the carrot.
Yeah. For instance, AI. Everybody's talking about AI, but also there's a huge amount of potential revenue for the companies that are developing it, and so they're charging forward. But with sustainability, it's almost in the opposite direction in some cases, where it's this isn't really as profitable, but it's going to be good for society at large, and so the altruism doesn't necessarily sweeten the deal for most people. So it's sort of what is that hook that gets the manufacturers involved?
Yeah, I think we're so far in at this point that it's not going to be the carrot that gets us there. It's going to be a stick, or maybe some combination, but I think the stick is going to have to be involved.
Okay, very good. Webster, closing comment.
I mean, I think the conversation of sustainability is still growing and developing, and lighting controls should be part of that conversation. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, we've won the KW war, so we're done. And it's like, no, that's not the only part of that equation. Lighting controls offers so much more, but we need to start engaging outside of our industry. We need to start reaching out to everybody who has a stake in the game to understand and help educate them. And so until we're able to really do that, we're going to be stuck at a very specific limit for our capabilities.
Mel, closing comment?
You know, when we think about sustainability, I think we've been like narrowed in on like one specific area of it for so long, like specifically like climate impact. And I have a lot of appreciation for the way the AIA defines sustainability. They look at 5 different focus areas. They look at human health, climate health, ecosystem health, social health and equity, and circularity. And so I find it exciting to start to think about some of these other aspects of sustainability that don't get as much attention as others do, like the social health and equity part or the circularity part, and you know, that we don't hear as much about. So I get excited about those conversations and finding metrics that we can use to measure to you know, these different standards that are outside of the more traditional ones.
So, Mel, we've not met before this, and it was a pleasure talking with you here, but I'd like to know, are you a member of WILD?
I am.
Are you a member of IES?
I am.
Are you a member of IALD?
Yes.
Okay, congratulations. You're doing all the right stuff. And you, Webster, are a brand new member of the NLB.
I am indeed.
So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right, guys, this was a great discussion. Thank you all. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.